Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Pressing Forward podcast. I'm the host, Noel Alpetu, and today we have a special guest, Jeremiah Brown. First and foremost, I want to take the time to appreciate you for the help that you've been able to extend towards me in previous years. So yeah, I just want to give you that your flowers for that, most definitely. So
Appreciate
um,
it.
yeah, so pretty much you're with Lead now. You're doing a couple different things, and I think the theme for today is going to be transition after the game. And I feel like you've been somebody who not only has been able to transition, but also transcend what it means to be more than an athlete. And you hold different, titles, different positions, like CEO of your own company, founder. You've worked in the, New York Department of Education system. Um, can you talk about a little about your story, how you started with all that, the organization you're running now?
Yeah, man. First and foremost, I appreciate you. Just seeing how you've matriculated. From high school to college, and now as a professional athlete. It's inspiring. I'm blessed that I played a small role in a big picture of many mentors that you've had, and just to be in that conversation is definitely made me feel really good. It makes me feel really good even being on this call with you. So thank you for having me in mind. Man, when you talk about the word transition, that's what I've committed my whole life to, right? Like I've committed my being, my purpose towards solving that problem, and that problem is student athletes only identifying with the sport that they play. Now, there's so much more that I do and offer through Lead, my company Lead. But nonetheless, at the root of it was really about how difficult it was for me to transition out of the game, right? Like I think oftentimes we look at people that we may admire, respect, or aspire to be like, and we say, wow, that person is really doing it. And I think the misconception is sometimes we think that that person has always been there, right? Where we see them now, right? So you look on social media and you might see a Will Smith, you might see a Tyler Perry, you might see, some people may say Jeremiah Brown, right? And it's like, wow, this dude's really doing it, but like I wasn't always here, right?
Definitely.
And it took so much pain, it took so much struggle, it took so much resilience and leadership within myself and around me to actually get to this place where I'm at. And I feel like I'm just getting started. You know what I mean? So yeah, man, it's definitely it was a challenge, transitioning out of the game for sure.
It's definitely, and you speak to an important part of just your growth and everything like that. Um, what have you found to be, I guess, the biggest, I would say, challenge in trying to make that transition initially? Because I don't know if people are too familiar with your story, but you played in the NFL, ended up having an injury that forced you to leave the game. What were the
Right.
feelings there? What were the emotions there when that initially happened?
Man, I'd say for your first question, the toughest part of the transition was knowing that I had so much to offer, but only like so it's like that saying iron sharpens iron, right? But if you only sharpen one iron, right, and you have like a so many different gifts and skills, and I think that's probably the as I've been doing research and just working with student athletes as they transition, including myself, we have so much that we can offer, right? We have so many strengths and so many weaknesses, but we spent so much time focusing on one strength
Right.
or one gift, which was the sport of, for me, it was football.
Right.
And, you know, when I was forced to transition out of the game, it was like I was like, man, like I know I want to work with kids, right? That's why I got a degree in education and sociology, right? But it was like I didn't necessarily know how I was going to utilize my gifts. I didn't necessarily know how I was actually going to impact, right? So when I first transitioned out, I thought like leadership was really about title, right? I thought it was about like, yo, I need to be the athletic director, right? If I could become the athletic director, then that's equivalent to, me still being in the NFL or me still playing professional ball because I'm this high figure or this high title. And, 4 years into working in the DOE after I retired, I became the youngest athletic director in all of New York State at the age of 24 years old. And it was one of those things where I just remember pushing a lot of papers. I remember, working on eligibility, but I wasn't really building relationships with kids. I wasn't really doing what I was passionate about. And I realized that although there's people in these positions that are doing some phenomenal work, from my college to high school, et cetera, and places that I've had the pleasure of working at, I knew for me that a bulk of that job had to deal with papers. And I wouldn't necessarily say organization has always been my strong suit, but as it relates to just me really figuring out what I wanted to do, I knew it was far more than just like organizing and pushing papers and doing those things, and actually getting my hands dirty and working in the trenches, which led me to becoming a teacher, a special education teacher, athletic director, dean of students. I've just spent my last 3 years in a charter school, and that's been amazing because being a school leader and being the dean of school culture and social emotional leadership has really, really stretched me to really take the work that I do outside of education to a whole nother level. So, yeah, it's been a journey for sure.
Most definitely, most definitely. And one of the things you speak about is after you initially kind of left the NFL, you want to find your place, something that was sort of equal to, I guess on an identity standpoint, equal to being in the NFL.
Yeah. Right.
And it seems like you quickly found out that, it doesn't, equal it wise. It doesn't equate to it, essentially. And with your work that you've done with these charter schools in the Department of Education, how important would you say is mentorship and the importance of mentorship and the lack thereof of mentorship?
Oh man, it's huge. I think that, I truly feel like if you believe in God or you don't, that we've all been called to do things. And, God and I believe is my rock and just strength and what keeps me grounded and focused and driven. He's placed something in my heart that I can't shake. You know what I mean? Like I literally can't shake it. Like it drives me the same way football drove me. You know what I mean? And when I mean drive is the drive to be great. You know what I mean? The drive to be the best at what I do and connecting with students, athletes, those who support their holistic development, right? And in my 10 years of working for the New York City Department of Education, I did my first 7 in public, last 3 in charter school. And my last 3, it wasn't that, if that was my plan, I wouldn't have done it, because after I left this school in Staten Island, I was ready to like leave. I was like, I'm done with education. Like this isn't for me, because I felt like there was so much of a disservice in terms of not just the last school that I was at in public, but just in general across New York City. Even thinking back to my high school experiences, I've had some amazing people like you had in high school where, they really cared about me. But as a whole, it just wasn't set up for me to really be successful. Like I had to like similar to your story, I had to do so much just to like get noticed and to do certain things, and I realized that it's not like that everywhere. I realized that there are schools where it's a village of people, not just 1 or 2 coaches, but it's a village of people that actually support, mentor, uplift, and pour into kids. And for me, man, not seeing the mentorship, for myself as a former athlete, working in spaces where mentorship wasn't necessarily a priority. And when I say mentorship, I look at it from a perspective of like the one thing I feel like every single thing that I've done throughout my life has led me to this place, and I've gotten skills tools from each position. And one of the tools that I got from being an athletic director at such a young age was it gave me the confidence to hold other adults accountable, right? Like I'm this young guy, I'm in charge of an entire athletic program, and I have to tell another adult, like it's easy on a football field of practice to say, yo, come on, let's run that extra sprint, or come on, let's win the game, because everybody's on the same page for the most part. But when you're dealing with like the professional life, it was very different for me to transition that leadership of like locker room talk to people that's never been in a locker room, but in charge of teams. So holding coaches accountable towards not just speaking to someone's heart, I mean, to someone's talent, but speaking to their heart with the same level that they speak to their talent. So for me, man, that's really why I founded LEAD, which is the name of my organization. LEAD is an acronym for Leaders Embracing All Dreams. And that's really been, just my passion, that's helping me just solve this problem.
And I think one of the things that really point out to me is the idea of exposure leading to expansion. That's kind of one thing that came to mind.
That's huge.
And how do you see that not only in kids and also because it's pertinent to adults as well. So like if you in an environment that allows you not only to just see what you want to become, it forces you to sort of change your perspective, how you look at things. How do you see that being how do you see that playing into kids as well? The idea of being able to expose them to various different possibilities, not just sports, because I know in our neighborhood, that's usually what we're exposed to early on is sports. But how do you see that, if we're able to not only just expose them to sports, but also to different opportunities, let them see different people, let them see different, how do you feel like that plays into their development?
I think it's huge. I think it goes back to the notion of like holding adults, right? And I know very early on, I made the same mistake that, a lot of coaches still make, educators still make. And that is you get this young man, you get this young woman that comes into your classroom or joins your team, and you expect them to know what you know. You expect them to have a level of like understanding, resilience, whatever it may be. Times I've made this mistake myself as a young coach. And like I said, I've been able to grow out of it because I'm so committed to this work and towards the expansion and the growth of our youth. But I've seen coaches still make this mistake where they'll get a kid and they're like, well, why didn't you come to practice today? Well, I didn't come to practice because I have to pick up my little brother and my little sister, right? So like there being there's a thing of empathy, right? Of understanding, but like you have to teach this young man or woman that like, that's okay. But the fact that you didn't communicate this to me as a coach is where this is going to trickle on outside of high school, right? You become a adult and you don't come to work because you had to pick up your kid, like you lose your job. The same way you can lose your position. And I think that when I think about the word exposure leads, the phrase exposure leads to expansion, I always paint a picture of a seed, right? I believe that every single one of us human beings have a seed of greatness inside of us, right? And, when you take a seed and you put it in a desert, the seed is the seed, but the environment won't necessarily position the seed to grow because it's not the right environment, right? It doesn't have the proper nutrients. It doesn't have what that seed needs to grow. So every seed is different. You know what I mean? There may be a seed, a genetically modified seed that could grow in the desert. But for the most part, knowing that every seed is different and every seed takes a specific amount of sunlight, a specific amount of water, different type of soil, some need fertilizer, right? Like that's how we have to begin to look at people and kids in our youth. And I think once we can do that and understand that, like, okay, I have 5 sunflower seeds and I can't put all 5 sunflower seeds in the same environment. And if they are in the same environment, I might have to water this one differently than I water than the one next to it. I might have to provide more sunlight to this one than I do the next one. And when we do that, when we're intentional about our leadership, what it does is it allows each person essentially to grow into who they were designed and destined to become, because we're being intentional about what we expose them to. You know, some people need more exposure than others as it relates to, you know, tutoring, right? As it relates to what college to go to, if it's a HBC versus a PWI, right? Like all of these things come into play based on where this person is coming from. Because if you're coming from a place like I did, where I had two amazing parents that gave me everything they had, but they didn't necessarily graduate college, right? So when it came to college, they didn't necessarily have the information to give me on, should I go to HBCU or should I go to just a traditional school? And does it make them bad parents? I just needed to be in an environment that exposed me to that. And because it wasn't, I can't say I made the worst mistake in going to Wagner College. I believe it was the best choice that I've ever made because it helped me become who I am today.
Right.
But, you know, that exposure is extremely important. You know, for me, that's something that I focus on when speaking to athletes, coaches, is that, you know, students have the ability to sometimes they don't have the choice on what their environment is, but I believe that adults, educators, coaches, parents have the responsibility, hold the responsibility of what that experience is like in that environment. You know what I mean? Like my parents didn't have everything, but what they did was that whatever they couldn't do, they found people within the village to support in those areas. And ultimately, it allowed me, my little brother, to just be who we are today.
Yeah, and I love that the seed analogy you used there, because it's very, I can easily picture that, and also it makes so much sense. And you speak to the responsibilities that, you know, not only parents but educators have in developing children and able to see their strengths, not only
Yep.
just point out weaknesses, but able to see their strengths as well. And the
Absolutely.
organization you're leading now, LEAD, can you talk a bit about what you're accomplishing there, what you aim to accomplish there, and what are some of the work that you guys are doing now within different schools and things like that?
So you said a word, you said a phrase, and that's a phrase that one of my mentors actually probably don't even remember me, but Fred Taylor, he said that exposure leads to expansion, right? And he said that on a podcast some time ago. And Fred Taylor was actually one of my mentors when I was in Jacksonville playing for the Jaguars. He was like one of my mentors, and he's one of the team scouts. And you know, there were so many things that he told me. But from the biggest thing was like legacy, right? Like, what's your legacy gonna be? And for me, being exposed to that at the age of 21, 22 years old, the Department of Education wasn't going to be my legacy, right? But I knew it was going to expose me to like what I needed to know in order to do it, right? So like 10 years ago, I had this vision that I wanted to help kids, right? Like, you know how long these NFL meetings are, how many meetings a day you have. And I just remember sitting in a meeting and I'm like, man, like I want to help kids one day. I want to be in position to give back to kids. And I knew for a fact that my legacy was going to be attached to that. I just didn't necessarily know what it looked like, what my vehicles were going to be to get me there, what initiatives, etc. And then I started a personal training business. And I thought I wanted to be a trainer, right? I was like, that's all I know. I can train people. I got certified. And you know, as much as I know, that's outside of coaching, being a trainer is essentially like the easiest transition, right? And I truly believe that we are so much more than trainers and coaches. Now, granted, some of us have been called to be coaches, some of us have been called to be trainers. I just was like, that looks good, but more so it was like, that looks easy. So I did it. Then I realized like, I don't want to train grandmas. I don't want to train aunties. I don't want to train uncles, whatever. I want to train athletes. One of my clients, she ended up being a school at my little brother's high school, actually. and we got connected. I started training her, and she was like, Jeremiah, you're a great trainer, and I need your support, and you helped me, but like you're so much more than this. And at first I was like, damn, like I thought I was doing something, training a principal, like I got a good client who's paying me a premium. And she was like, yo, you know, these kids need you. And it was just like a light bulb went off, like boom, like I just don't. And my response was like, I just don't know what I can help them with. And she was like, what? And the way she looked at me, I'll never forget it. And she was like, this is what I'm gonna do. You know, I'm gonna nominate you, and you're gonna be a substitute. So because I had already had a file number, I was already fingerprinted because of my undergrad experience. It was kind of like I was just like, the clock just kept going. And essentially, you know, I started working in education, and I realized more and more that like these kids aren't being supported. You know what I mean? And that support is subjective, right? It wasn't like systemic, right? It wasn't where it was like in the PSAL, this is what every single coach is mandated to do, right? This is like where it's supposed to happen. Every single school should have an academic coach, and that academic coach makes sure his kids are eligible. That academic coach is, you know, in partnership with the NCAA, providing the resources. That's subjective, right? In all of the high performing schools, from Staten Island to the Bronx, you have that. But in 5 boroughs, there might be 5 schools that do it, right?
Right.
So for me, it was just like what happens to the kids that go to schools like I did, right? I went to Grand Street campus. I had amazing coaches who loved me, who cared about me, similar to your coaches at Port Richmond,
Right.
but they were only 3 people, right? Of coaching a team of 40 people, right? So there's but so much, you know, the head coach and the assistant coach can do when he's trying to water 30 different seeds. You know what I mean? Everybody needs different support. So what I did was I said, okay, I see what the problem is, but how am I going to figure out what the solution is going to be? And it wasn't until my last school that I left in the DOE where I said, I'm tired of this. I need to be a part of the solution. And that's when I founded LEAD. And I actually founded LEAD in 2015. I was scared, had imposter syndrome. I didn't think that I could run a business. So I didn't do anything my first year. I just had that formation. And then in 2016 is when I started, like, I developed the logo and I did all of the behind the scenes stuff. And then it wasn't until 2017 where we actually did the thing. And the thing was training athletes at a high level. And then even in 2017, I realized that, you know, training athletes wasn't it. You know, I felt everybody was training athletes, and I knew that I was still contributing to the problem because what was happening wasn't helping athletes. So I said, I have to change this up. And to be honest, LEAD first stood for Leaders Embracing Athletic Dreams. And then it wasn't until 2020 where pandemic hit, and then I rebranded to Leaders Embracing All Dreams, which properly reflected the brand. And we've evolved from training athletes to partnering with schools as a New York City vendor, where we partner with athletic programs, and we have a holistic student athlete model where we partner with schools, primarily throughout New York City, and we provide holistic development, right? And when you think of holistic development, we're thinking about the entire athlete, not just the physical, how strong, how fast, how much he can shoot, how well he can throw, but like, how does he handle adversity? How does he understand what his gifts are outside of his sport? How can we prepare these kids before they get to college? How can we prepare these kids so that when they get to college, they understand what it means to compete? They understand what process means. How do we get these kids to understand and have a chance at getting a scholarship, right? How do we position these kids to tap into the gifts that they have and help them create a path on developing and watering these seeds that they've been blessed with outside of their sport. And it took a long time, you know, and we're still, you know, putting the pieces together, but it took us years to get to where we are today. And I'm just extremely blessed that I'm in a position to do this work at the level in which and have the impact, right? And lastly, I'll say, I knew working for a school, if I was to give everything I had to a school, they would be successful.
Yeah.
Because of my experience. But then what about the kids in other places and spaces just like them? And for me, that's when it was like legacy. My legacy isn't going to be tied to one school. My legacy is going to be tied to student athletes all over the world. So for me, it was building a global brand. It went from something so small to God saying, nah, this is much bigger than you, you know? And yeah, man, that's LEAD. And we're still growing.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that came to mind when you were speaking, it sort of seems like you took a leap of faith, right? Initially, you didn't know exactly how it was going to look. You didn't know exactly how everything was going to play out. You said you had imposter syndrome. And I think that's what stops a lot of people from even moving forward is, you know, there's a fear factor to it. How am I going to do it? What am I going to do? And I think the most important thing that you did there was you took that leap of faith, right? Can you talk more about what that imposter syndrome looked like for you? Because I'm sure a lot of people who are going after certain dreams, going after certain ambitions, they might have that element of, you know, imposter syndrome as well. So can you talk about kind of what that looked like for you as well?
Yeah, man. So I still deal with it to this day. You know, I think that for me, I'm in a place now where, you know, I've paid my dues and I'm still paying my dues. Right. So what I tell athletes, what I tell people that have big dreams and big goals is like, that's great. Right. Like you have a direction, you have a focal point, like you deserve that. But don't get it twisted. That's the prize, right? That's the prize. There's a process that leads you to the prize.
Right.
And the process is what I had to like fall in love with all over again. Because truth be told, I loved football, but I loved the grind more. I love the waking up and training, and I just love that part about it. And it was to the point where like I loved it so much that it was difficult for me to like, you know, as an athlete now, it's like, man, I don't got to work out tomorrow, you know, but, and then, you know, you kind of go through these transitions as an adult where it's like, man, like, I don't need to like tackle someone or I don't need to like outrun someone. So like, I don't really need to work out anymore. So for me, it was like, I had all this confidence in one area of my life, which was football. And I didn't realize like, yo, I've been speaking my whole life. I was always the kid in the locker room from high school to college, even a little bit professionally, where like I was the one pumping people up. I was the one, and it wasn't because like I wanted to.
Right.
It was just something burning inside of me that was like, I can't just sit here and like I gotta like let people know and remind them of who they are and who we are and what we can do as a whole. And I realized like, man, people kept telling me and inviting me to speak and to do all of these things. And it was like, yo, like, I could really do this. And it wasn't until I got exposed to mentorship within the speaking realm where I actually got the guidance from professional speakers, right? Like I've spent years, I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of speaking opportunities where I did it for free because I didn't know there was a business to it, right? So you have LEAD, and then you have Jeremiah Brown, who is its own brand, where I've been blessed and called to use my gift of speaking in so many different spaces and places where that is the vehicle that sheds light on the passion, right? So the passion isn't necessary. Like I enjoy speaking, but the passion is LEAD, right? Like that's the passion and purpose. My speaking is what allows me to get in front of people and have conversations like this and properly articulate and convey what it is that I do, who I'm about, and what my promise is to this society, to the world. And I think that is what I had to like overcome in terms of the imposter syndrome of like, man, like nobody's gonna pay you, you know, $10,000 to speak for 30 minutes, for 15 minutes. Nobody's gonna train with you. Nobody's gonna sign their school up to work with LEAD. And I used to think so much about like the what ifs that I had to start like changing how I spoke to myself and say like, nah, like it's not like what if this is happening, but it's just like this could actually happen. You know what I mean? Like, why not? You know what I mean? Like, why not me? Like, why can't this happen? And I just remember every time I get imposter syndrome, I think about putting on an orange apron and checking into Home Depot 6 months after I retired from playing in the NFL. And I was blessed with some walkaway money because at the height of the whole concussion and CTE was in 2012 when I caught my concussion and the doctors wouldn't clear me. So because the doctors wouldn't clear me, I already had, and you know, going through the process that they test everything from your fingernails to like every single injury. And I've had already had 3 previous concussions on my record. And because of that, through the grace of God, my agent was able to like put that like in the event that he can no longer play due to a brain injury, that he would receive this amount of his contract. And then of course he would get a percentage as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when I walked away from the game, I had some money. It wasn't forever money, but it was enough for me to like really like start my life and to you know, position myself to be where I am today. And you know, I just remember, you know, checking in the Home Depot because it was like I have this money, but if I spend it, I'm gonna be broke, you know. And then that was my first fear of like, man, I don't want to go broke. But I didn't know how to make investments. I didn't know the stock market or any of those things. So I got a job and I started working at Home Depot and I was there for a week. And literally in that week, a kid was like, that's Jeremiah Brown. He's from, and I just never forget that same day I cried. And I think back on that day now because it reminds me like, yo, like you've gone through so much more and you've gained so much from that moment 10, 11 years ago to where now when people are paying you 10, $15,000 to speak for 15 minutes, you've earned that, right? Like you've done the work, right? Like you've paid your dues and I'm continuing to pay my dues. So for me, man, it's really about that process. So when I think about imposter syndrome to like fully, you know, answer your question, I think about the process. And I think about anytime I get in my own head and I say, well, they wouldn't, or why would they? And I'm not good enough. I just remind myself of you got to change up your process. You know, how prepared are you for this opportunity? You know, and when I do that, I just tap into a completely different mode, man. And I get it done, you
Yeah.
know, through the grace of God. So yeah, man, that imposter syndrome is, I still battle with it though. You know, I'd be lying if I said there aren't days where I wake up and I'm like, man, this is difficult. You know, I just resigned from my job 2 weeks ago. And this is year 10 and a half for me in education. I'm making well over 6 figures. And I said, I got 2 kids. I'm married. Do I really want to do this? And it was a battle with myself of like, can you actually do this? And I prayed on it. I used this past year to prepare for it. And 2 weeks ago, I made that decision. And, you know, I'm doing this full time now. So there are nerves, there's anxiety that comes with it, but um, it's the only way to lead like a champion, for real.
And I personally just want to commend you for being able to make such a decision. And you touched on a little different elements there in terms of, passion, having the passion. But I think the true thing that stuck out to me was the importance of doing the work.
Yeah,
I think
out of the book.
that's something that's very unavoidable in any
Yep.
facet or any area of that you're trying to accomplish something. There's a work, there's a process behind it. And I think that's the part that we cannot overlook. You know what I mean? People want the prize, people want the results, but there's a deliberate process behind everything. So,
Right.
when you're going after these
Right.
dreams, these different ambitions, understand that, there's this work that has to be done in order to become that person. And how we like to usually end the episode is just a bit of advice that you would like to leave with the audience. It could be anything that you would like to leave with the audience.
Man, you definitely said it. But there's one thing that I've realized when it comes to who we are currently and who we aspire to be. If you're 15-year-old watching this, if you're 20, if you're 25, if you just graduated college, if you graduated college and you're just trying to still navigate and figure out life, I just hope that you pick up what I'm going to put down. And what I'm going to put down is this. There's a gap between where you currently are and the person that you aspire to be. Now, that gap, how big it is all based on your experience or lack thereof experience. In that gap, there are levels within that gap, right? There are levels, I should say, rather, in terms of closing that gap. And I like to paint this picture for individuals, purpose-driven individuals, because oftentimes we get so caught up in the prize of like, man, I see where I am, and I've seen on social media, on TV, or just in my imagination, who I want to be, who I aspire to be. Now, like I started off this podcast by saying, sometimes people look at my life and they think that I've always been here. But who I was 10 years ago, there was a huge gap from who that person was as a former professional athlete in the best shape of his life to the 32-year-old Jeremiah, who's an inspirational speaker, who is an entrepreneur, who is a tenured educator, right? All of these different things, even as an school administrator, I've had to realize that if I want to be better, I have to be willing to stretch myself and oftentimes pay for exposure, pay for coaching, pay for, and when I say pay, I mean invest. And I think that oftentimes we are so afraid to invest, and we take so much from others and we give other people more credit than we even give ourselves, or lack thereof. We tend to hold other people more accountable for our dreams than we hold ourselves for our dreams. For example, someone can do something to you in terms of call you a bad name, and as you're working towards this dream or goal, they may say you can't do it, right? Like if you're looking at this video and you're hearing me right now, you've been told that before, like, I can't do this, you'll never be able to do this. And then you get so mad at this individual, right? To the point where like you want to now prove this person wrong. No. Don't spend so much time closing that gap, proving people wrong. Spend that time proving the people that support you right. Because what happens is we submit ourselves to proving people wrong when trying to close this gap, that we don't necessarily hold ourselves accountable when we tell ourselves we can't do it, right? We don't hold ourselves accountable when we wake up and say, well, it's not possible, I'll never be able to do it. And we need to hold ourselves accountable to how we speak to ourselves, the same way we hold other people accountable to where they speak about us or speak about what it is that we want to do. So if you look at what you want to do and you say, okay, I understand who I am, cannot currently sustain what I want to achieve, because that's the last piece, right? Sometimes we want things that our character can't necessarily properly sustain, right? So we might want $1 million, but our character can't sustain $1 million, because if we get it, we don't necessarily know how to keep it, or we don't know how to flip it, or we don't know how to get it again if we're given it, right? So I always tell student athletes, anyone that I'm working with in terms of like purpose, entrepreneurship, etc., is don't necessarily pray for the $1 million or the stardom. Pray for the character that's going to help you achieve it and sustain it. Because oftentimes when we focus so much on the prize without doing the work in the process, that we lose sight of ourselves. So that when we finally crawl and we get there, we look back and we don't necessarily know how we got there. You know what I mean? And I think for me, you know, once I was really able to just understand that and say, okay, I want to be, there was a time where I said, I want to be a 6-figure speaker, right? Like, I get it now. People are getting paid to speak, right? I'm doing this for free. So I said, well, I could try to do this by myself, or I can find the #1 youth motivational speaker in the world and lock arms with him. And that's what I did. And by reaching out, I asked questions. He said, man, I actually have a course that's $5,000. I saved my money. I invested in that course. I went from making $0 speaking, joining his course. Last year, I made over 6-figure speaking. This year, my goal is to triple it. And then 3 years from now, why not make $1 million speaking, right? And why not funnel that to the passions and the things that I want to do? But I had to do the work, right? And like you said, you know, it's unavoidable. So if you're listening, please pick up what I'm putting down, and that is close the gap between where you are and where you aspire to be. And that's by doing the work. That's by making the investment. And that's by remaining disciplined to what you said that you want.
Learn and love it. I definitely love everything you just said there, man. And I hope that, you know, even if it sticks with one person, that it has a lasting impact with them. So again, I want to thank you for coming on to the show, sharing your wisdom, sharing your knowledge, and be sure to follow him on all his social platforms. We're going to put it in the link and everything like that. So in any way that, you know, you can support, or even just, you know, go in there, show some love, do so as well. So thank you guys, and have a nice day.